Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a holistic coach and trauma-informed practitioner. This podcast seeks to break out of the echo chamber of societal narratives that perpetuate our institutions and challenge the status quo of wellness and beyond. Join me as we decolonize our minds, address and use our privilege, and prioritize inclusivity. Here, diverse experiences are honoured, and together we are fostering a space that stands for higher love for all. As a listener, you are not just here to passively consume. You're an ambassador for deep healing and societal evolutions, ready to engage in thought-provoking, challenging conversations. As your host, I'm committed to providing ever-expansive spaces that inspire us to contribute to a world defined by higher love. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Tamu, I often do a deep dive into people just before I get them on the podcast in a kind of stalker-esque way of reading all of their posts and watching all their videos and reading all their copy. So that's what I've been doing for the past couple of hours with yourself. And what I've been thinking whilst reading all your stuff and watching your things is, oh my God, everyone needs this work. Like everyone needs this. So I'm very excited to welcome you into this conversation. So thank you so much for your time today. There in your wonderful pink jumper.
My winter brights. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, amazing. And really, really great to connect with you. And I also love that, the timing of this conversation too, it seems like the perfect time to be having a conversation centered around kind of toxic productivity as we enter January, because as you're probably all too aware of, society kind of tells us January, out the floodgates, hustle culture, off we go. So it feels really good to be having this conversation today. And I wanted to just kickstart by obviously creating a space for you to introduce yourself and kind of who you are, whatever feels alive for you in a way that feels, good for you to introduce yourself today.
Well, my name is Tamu Thomas, and you said what's present with me right now. My name means the one who brings joy. It's a Swahili word, and in Eastern Africa, in the Swahili language, it means sweet, tasty. But as a name, my parents are from Sierra Leone, it means the one who brings joy. And I'm looking at my jumper today and also my book at the back, and it makes me feel joyful, those bright colors and stuff. And so, I'm a joyful lover of life. I'm very curious about all sorts of things. And my journey into doing this work and being in the position where I'm here on your podcast is that joy was replaced by toxic productivity. My joy was received as frivolous, as in some cases childlike, like I couldn't possibly be serious, I couldn't possibly be ambitious if I was smiling all the time and finding silver linings where people thought it would be bleak. And so I very quickly learned that actually it wasn't okay to be me. And the way I impress people, the way I am valued by people, the way I encourage people to like me and want to be around me is by what I do rather than who I am and who I be. So I very quickly learned that if I worked really hard, and that work could look like delivering work in the workplace, overstretching myself, volunteering for things or taking on extra things when I didn't have the capacity to do so, or going to places I didn't really want to go to, socializing in a way that I'd outgrown, I'd learned that those are the ways you favor. And the more I did that, the more disconnected I felt with myself. And it all came to a head. I was a social worker. That's my background. Because I didn't realize I was burnt out, I thought I need to become an independent social worker. And if I do that, I'll be in charge of the work I take on, etc. So I won't feel as exhausted all the time. And I basically had a panic attack outside court. And it wasn't anything to do with the court case. I was used to going to court. I was an expert witness all the time. That was like part of the meat and potatoes of my job. But my body was screaming for about 10 years. And it literally had to shut me down in order for me to take stock. And in that taking stock, I realized that there was barely any joy. There were moments of happiness, but actually the type of joy I used to have all the time that radiated from within, it had disappeared. And as I looked into it, I just thought, oh, I don't know how to be if I'm not being productive. And I didn't know what toxic productivity was. I didn't know it was something that would be such a major feature. But as I transitioned from social work to coaching, I noticed that all the women I worked with as a coach, they worked with me because they wanted to experience more joy. They wanted to heal their relationship with themselves. They wanted to live a better life. Every single one of them, their ability to live in a vibrant way was being impeded by the way they work. Well, women in heterosexual relationships, it was by the way they work and also the function of their heterosexual relationship. And I thought, I've got my own troubles with understanding the male species, but work, I understand. And I talked about it so much, I talked myself into a book deal.
Mm, amazing. Amazing. So, how was that transition out of social work for you at that time?
Uh, Basically, I was totally burnt out. So after that I didn't know it was a panic attack. So I had this experience where I thought I was going to die. I was contemplating calling an ambulance. Somehow I remembered tools I used with children I worked with, managed to get myself together, go to court, slay it. The judge was talking about what a wonderful piece of work I'd done and my report being wonderful, etc. And I thought, this isn't right. I went to the doctors and they referred me for psychotherapy. And when I eventually got to see somebody, they explained that I had been experiencing what they described as a severe level of moderate depression. I'd left that, it had morphed into anxiety. I'd left that, and what I was describing as heightened periods of anxiety were panic attacks. And I'd always wanted to have my own business. I assumed I was going to have a social work business because that's what I did. And as a child, one of my aunties had her own business. I write about her in my book. And she lived in Sierra Leone. This was in the 80s, but she traveled all around the world with her work because she used to do lots of work for the United Nations and organizations like that. And I just remember people talking about my auntie Aminata being this international businesswoman. And she looked so jolly and radiant and bright. She always had a huge smile on her face. She smelled of Rive Gauche perfume. She wore pencil skirt suits. And I just looked at her. And in comparison to the women I was around, like my mum and my aunts and the people in my neighborhood, she looked like something I'd never seen before. She was radiant. She was magnetic. She was remarkable. I thought, if that's what happens when you're an international businesswoman, I want to be like her. So I always had a seed about having a business in my brain. And then when this happened, I thought, right, I'm going to set up my social work business. And it didn't really do anything. I just wasn't supposed to be doing that. I recognized it was a soul calling that was pushing me in the direction I was too frightened to go in. And I started doing my own healing work and discovered the world of positive psychology. When I really like things, I like to learn about them because I like to understand things. So, of course, I went and did a positive psychology short course, and the lecturer, he's also a coach. And I was talking to him about coaching because I wanted to do a coaching qualification. And he was like, you don't need to. You're not going to learn anything in a coaching qualification that you don't know already, because you do know social workers are the coaches of the therapeutic world. And I was like, oh, okay. Still wasn't satisfied with that. So I did do a coaching qualification. And that's when I started to understand how transferable my skills were and how much coaching could support other people. And I didn't want to let go of the foundations of social work because I could see it would be a really powerful force for good. And I could see so many women around me. It was just like a disco ball of mirrors of overworking women, striving, ambitious, never satisfied, never feeling fulfilled. And I thought, well, I can utilize my own personal experience, the evidence base I come from in social work, and what I'm learning in relation to coaching, positive psychology, and the nervous system to be able to support these women. And so that's what I did. And I talked about it so much. A publisher, an editor from a publisher messaged me and asked me if I'd thought about writing a book about the things I talk about. And I was like, well, I have, but not about this, but I
Mm.
can. And yeah.
Mm. Were there many things whilst you went about writing the book? Were there lots of things that that surprised you? Because I imagine that when you start delving into the arena of, toxic productivity and just go deeper and deeper and deeper and kind of into that learning, I imagine like how was that for you? Were there lots of things that surprised you? Did it bring up a lot of emotions? What happened for you?
Nothing was a surprise because when people read my book, when they hear me speak,
Mm.
they're like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense because it's hidden in plain sight. And because we're conditioned to do, not to be, and we are taught from a very young age that our feelings, our emotions, the emotional intelligence, like we are all emotional beings. If we're really honest about it, the majority of what we do is governed by emotion, whether we call it that or not. We have learned to very quickly detach from our emotions, to dissociate and follow something we call logic. And when people slow down and listen, sometimes people will say, like, it feels like you were speaking directly to my heart, like their brain didn't have the opportunity to bat it away. So we know this stuff inherently because I'm talking about stuff our biology knows, and our biology has developed over millennia. We are the total of all the things we have evolved into that has brought us to this moment. So on a cellular intrinsic level, we know this. What surprised me after writing, I like lots of solitude. I like to be with my thoughts. I love writing. So, and I've got ADHD. I'm a late diagnosed person with ADHD. So I was terrified I wasn't going to finish the project. So I was really fueled by getting it done and by the passion of getting this story out into the world. The emotions and me actually sitting with my own experience and how much that affected every facet of my life happened once the manuscript was submitted. And then it became exacerbated when the book came out and people started sharing quotes, started talking about how the book had landed with them. And it's still a very challenging emotional experience for me because I came into contact, I started to be present with all of the things I shut down and put in freeze and I high functioned on top of so that I couldn't feel those things. And it was really painful. And tuning into the things you talk about, what I realized in like rereading my book, listening to the audiobook and visiting the book from time to time when I'm creating content is how much our culture of toxic productivity teaches us how not to love ourselves. Like I say, it teaches us how to unlove ourselves. We unlove ourselves and put our love in baskets in like work is going to give me love, relationships are going to give me love. And so the love that we can only really give ourselves, we squash it down or we put it in other places. And then we're yearning for things from places that are never, ever going to be able to give us what we need. Only we can do that. And I recognize how much love and care I needed that I couldn't face, that I was putting into being productive, that I was putting into being a good mum, being a good employee, being a good friend, and how much that created a situation where I abandoned myself so much that what I needed felt so fragile and tender. I felt like if I actually came into contact with it, I would collapse. The vision I have in my head is that I would just fall into the bottom of the well and I wouldn't be able to get out. It would be dank and dark and I would be all alone, hearing the voices above, but being totally alone. And that was absolutely terrifying until I realized the more, if you imagine a well is really deep, the more you make time and space and create care for all of those fragile feelings, the bottom rises up. So it's not as deep as you think it is because you're starting to meet those needs, repair the relationship with yourself and build up that self-trust.
Mm. And something that comes up for me there, just from reading your posts, is you talk about building spaciousness into your schedule, like
Yeah.
actually creating chunks of time for just spaciousness. Can you
Yeah.
speak to that?
If I don't do that, and the people who work with me are very similar, if we don't put spaciousness into our diaries, we won't take that space. We love to be productive. We love to tick things off the to-do list. We love that energy of, I'm exhausted. That means I've worked really hard. I've used my energy well, when actually that's depleting ourselves. And we don't feel like we've got the right to have rest time unless we've grinded ourselves to be able to earn it. And also, I have clients, again, ADHD. I am not playing date tennis with anybody. You've got a link to my calendar. I've got my available time on there. Book, It does everything, it puts the Zoom link and everything in. So if I don't block out that time, people can book time in there. And if I don't visibly see that that time has been allocated for sitting in my pink contemplation chair, looking at the sky through my window, because it gives me lots of nourishment, I don't do it as a, I'm going to sit in that pink chair because I'm going to get great ideas for work. I know that I will get great ideas for work, but that's not the purpose. That's a moment for me to be with myself. So if I don't put those times in, I'm not going to do it. So some people look at my diary and they'll think, oh my goodness, what is that? But if I don't allocate my time, if I don't dedicate my time, I will misuse my time. So I've got, when I'm going to the gym, I've got my contemplation time in there. I have got my writing time in there. I've got all sorts of things in there to make sure that I am also a priority in my diary. Otherwise, my diary will just look like everybody else's needs.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm still in the process of divorcing myself from so much of this conditioning. It's like I think that I've done a load of work around it, and then there's like the next layer, the next layer, the next
Yeah.
layer. And like, oh, I've fallen back into it again. There I go again. And I suppose I started to notice, this in my mid-20s. I was working in the city. A lot of my friends were working in, corporate finance and corporate this and corporate that. And I had a corporate job. And every time, we met up as a group of friends, it was kind of like, oh, I've been working this many hours and oh, I've been given this and oh, sorry, I'm late. I was kept back by this project. And it was almost this like glorification of who is the most busy equals who is the most important.
Absolutely.
And I feel like I mean, I know for myself that like I find myself still coming out of that. And one of your posts that I loved was talking about how burnout is not personal, but systemic. And I feel like this is such an important point for people because, I
Yeah.
mean, I meet so many people who have gone through or are going through burnout. And it's kind of like people trying to look for what's happened in their life. And obviously, we each have our own unique manifestation of burnout,
Yes.
but people are like pinpointing what's uniquely happened for them as opposed to this huge collective kind of zooming out of why is this happening to us. So
Yes.
can you speak to that, this kind of personal versus systemic burnout?
Well, firstly, we are the system. The system doesn't operate without our participation. So we have a symbiotic relationship. We are a product of our environment, and our environment is a product of us. We can see that with climate crisis and all the things we've got going on in the world. So I want to be clear about that because we think the system is something that happens over there. No, actually, we support it or we don't. And when people start talking about, I shared a post on social media. The first time I talked about this, I felt quite ashamed. And I was doing an event for Harper's Bazaar, and it was all of these women, Deloitte, Thomson Reuters, KPMG, all of these like city slickers were in there. And I talked about a period of time where I was so stressed with the volume of work and my own responsibilities as a human being, as a mother, that I would fantasize about having a minor car accident on the way to work so I could have some rest and some care. Nothing major, a little bit of whiplash, not even an overnight stay in the hospital, but I'd need to go to hospital and they would sign me off and I would be able to earn rest. No permanent damage. And when I shared that story in that room with these women who are, towards the peak of their career in the city, practically everybody had their own version of that story. Then I spoke to women who talked about wanting something similar to happen during the Christmas period, because the most wonderful time of the year is not very wonderful when you're the mother and you're responsible for all of these things. And I speak to women all day long, every day, and the manifestation might be different, but the root is the same, the pattern is the same. So when we have these experiences, we've got to realize, even though our individual expression is different, if we are all experiencing the same pattern, there is something systemic going on. There is something cultural going on. And when we look at our culture, it is very easy to see that all of the things that lead us to burnout are all of the things we are rewarded for. Oh, you can rely on Megan. She'll do it. She's really busy, but she'll always make time to do this extra thing. Oh, you can rely on Tamu. Someone's leaving. It doesn't matter that she's got a massive court case that she's preparing for. She'll pop down to Mark's and she'll get the cake and the card and organize the this, the that, the other. So it's all of these things that mean we're so focused on busy work, we're not focused on the high value work. And we feel like if we focus on high value work that is actually going to get us results, we're going to be seen as not being a team player. We're going to be seen as not being supportive. We're going to be seen as selfish. We're going to be seen as self-serving, too ambitious. Because if you think about the work you need to do that helps you make progress, it's very different to the work that gets you liked. But as women, we are primed to focus on the work that gets us liked. So there are so many things that happen that contribute to us experiencing burnout. And when we look at it as an individual failing, as opposed to a product of the systems in which we live, we make it about us being wrong, about us being defective. We're not managing our time properly. We're not prioritizing, when actually the organizations we operate within, whether it's our family of origin organization, whether it's the family we create organization or the work organization, it relies on women giving themselves away willy-nilly, freely, not having anything left. That's when you're selfish. I mean, you're selfless. She's not selfish, she's selfless. She's a good woman. She'll do anything for everyone. She'll give them the last fiver out of her purse. She'll give you her coat to wear. These are all of the things we're celebrated for, but these are the things that don't lead us to progress. And what I will say is, when you are working really hard for finite periods of time and you get tangible results that not only you can see, but you can celebrate and enjoy, you don't get burnt out. When you are working hard for the sake of working hard and there's no result, that's when you're much more likely to get burnt out. Serena Williams, she's an athlete. And I remember watching something, there was like one of her elite trainer who trained her at one point in time. He was saying he expresses to his athletes when they first start working with him that the rest is more important than the race. That's what sets you up. But for us, we're not allowed to rest. Rest is going to sleep at the end of a hard day's work. If you say, PA, don't book me back-to-back meetings, I need at least 20 minutes between each meeting so I can just take a moment to decompress. Who does she think she is? What do you mean you need 20 minutes break? That's a waste of time. You do that in your lunch break, and we don't do that in our lunch break. We've got one hand on our mouse, the other hand on a crappy sandwich from downstairs because we haven't had the opportunity. So it is encouraged. And last thing, so I know I say so much, but think about the education system. We all go to school when we're about 4 years old. Most of us are 4 years old when we go to school if you follow a curriculum that's based on British or American education. So at 4 years old, last week, you were being celebrated for when you recognize you need to go to the toilet and you say to your nursery teacher or the carer you're with, I need to go to the toilet. They celebrate you. Yay! Tammy was able to meet her needs. She knows what to do. She goes to the loo. She sorts herself out. She washes her hands. She's so responsible. Fantastic. Yay. And then next week you're at school. You put your hand up. You need to go to the loo. And the first thing you're asked is, can you hold it? Can you wait? Now, I'm not saying children should just go off to the toilet willy-nilly. We do need to learn how to, control ourselves in environments. But from a very young age, we are taught that when it comes to being productive, your needs go on the back burner. Children who are still at a point where they're full of fizzy energy and they're supposed to be wriggling around and moving and playing all the time are rewarded for being able to sit still on a carpet whilst the teacher reads the book. So very quickly we learn that the things that make us human get in the way of our productivity. And we start that learning at an age where our brain, I don't know if it's theta, alpha, what, but we're in the brainwave state where that is like hypnosis. So we're hypnotized into recognizing that in order for us to succeed, in order for us to be told that we're a good boy or a good girl, in order for us to get good grades, we need to abandon ourselves and orient our whole lives towards doing the same thing the same way every day with incremental improvements. So it's very, very deeply ingrained. And I want us to understand that, because when we do, we can start to think, ah, okay, I can see that's my conditioning. What are the bits that work for me? And what do I need to adapt so that so that it works in my favor, as opposed to boxing me in? I will never, ever be the person whose consistency looks like I'm going to do the same thing every day at 11 a.m. I'm just not designed like that. But I can do other things, or I can sit in my chair and I can contemplate. And there's going to be about 7 days in the month where I could do a month's worth of work in that 7 days. And people are like, oh my goodness, how did that happen? But that's my consistency. But our system will tell you that that is inconsistent, that is flaky, that is somebody who's not committal, even though I'm going to be able to do way more than the person that shows up at 11 a.m. every day.
Mm. On the topic of consistency, you draw a lot of attention, which is, what's the word? A lot of, well, let me start that sentence again. You draw a lot of attention to how a lot of work around productivity and a lot of work around habit creation hacks have been written or told by men.
Yes.
So how do you feel that women are gaslit in the arena of productivity?
There are the vast majority of men who write about productivity, personal development, and all of that. We've only started learning really and truly about periods, perimenopause, menopause very recently. All the education we have about perimenopause is very, very recent. When I first started writing my book, or when I was writing my proposal for my book in 2022, perimenopause didn't come up in spell check. It would be a mistake, right? Exactly, because it wasn't recognized then. It's changed now. So we don't have that much information. So men, they haven't had the opportunity to get that much information either. Also, the reality is we live in a very patriarchal world. So all of, like, the vast majority of studies that have been done don't take into consideration the cyclical nature of womanhood. So we have a lot of productivity that is about showing up the same way every day consistently, in inverted commas or whatever speech marks. That's okay for men who get consistent pumps of testosterone all throughout the day. But like, all human beings are cyclical, but for women and people with a menstrual cycle, our cycle takes us throughout the month. So if you think about the moon, how at the beginning of the lunar calendar of the month, you've got the new moon and it blossoms into the full moon. That's what a woman's cycle is like. We don't have the same energy levels and same capabilities throughout the month in the way men do. So when we try to take a very linear approach to our productivity, what we often do is end up causing ourselves more harm. Now, I live in the real world. I don't live in a world like, there are some people who do like menstruation coaching, and it's almost like you down tools on the few days before your period and the first few days of your bleed. I don't live in a world that operates like that. But what I do, bearing in mind my cycle, is I've got to understand what is the kind of nurture and support I need in order for me to be productive during those days. And also, how do I meet myself where I am? So it's not just about, okay, it's day 27 of my cycle and my inner critic is usually loud and my energy is usually low. So I'm going to strategize my way out of that. How do I navigate my diary so that it takes those things into consideration? But also, if I need to do something and I need to up the energy, like if I've got a speaking gig on day 27 of my cycle, I can't just go and say, oh, sorry, everybody, my mood is low, so you're not going to get the most vivacious version of me. I can navigate that and manage that. So we need to really study ourselves and understand that. Furthermore, because we live in a patriarchal society, when men are writing these books, they don't take into consideration gender roles. So I joined a program because, speaking about what you talked about earlier on, I'm constantly having to remind myself I don't need to constantly jack up my nervous system and operate from fight or flight. Like, it's a constant piece of work. You don't just say, oh, that's it, I'm no longer a member of the Toxic Productivity Club, because it's so deeply, deeply entrenched. But I joined this program about productivity. And what I noticed was he kept talking about you need to go on monk mode. You need to be able to book yourself a few days a month away from your family so that you can just get on with it. And I just noticed women, when they were being like coached by him and they were speaking to the responsibilities they had, it's not because he was being mean or anything, but some of them ended up in tears because they were struggling to reconcile how they could manage their family lives and go on monk mode. It was all right for him to go on monk mode. He had 6 children who were cared for by his stay-at-home wife. So he could just log out, book a hotel, and go there for however many days every month. But the women couldn't do that. So it's about recognizing that we live in a society where men and women are not equal. We wouldn't have all of these. I know there's a backlash about DEI programs at the moment, but there wouldn't be a need for all of this gender equity work if we lived in an equal society. International Women's Day wouldn't be such a big deal in comparison to International Men's Day if there wasn't such a disparity between gender and gender roles. So the kind of generic productivity advice doesn't take that into consideration. So then women feel inadequate, we feel bad. And when we say feel bad, what we really feel is shame, like we are bad, like we're ineffective, when actually we weren't designed to be that way. And just one more thing, one of the things that I learned during the research for my book, like I learned it when I was doing whatever training I was doing, but the research is very clear that a woman's amygdala, which is like the reptilian part of our brain, like the danger, high alert center, is much more active than men's. So not only are we looking out for signs of danger more than men are, ability to navigate that stress and our biological ability to process that stress is different to men, which is why women will be impacted by stress at higher numbers statistically than men. And then on top of that, because of the gender bias and our gender roles, we don't have the opportunity to do the things that help us process stress and complete that stress cycle, like working out, expressing anger in an open way, because either society tells us that women shouldn't behave that way, it's not demure, it's not mindful, or we just don't have the time to be able to go and do those things in the way that men are able to. So we need a different approach to productivity, and we need to recognize that we cannot judge ourselves by the version of ourselves that is present during ovulation. Ovulation is like, if you think about the monthly cycle, I'm not saying that the rest of the month is terrible, but we are at our best for about 7 days of the month. Apart from that, we are either working up to being our best or we're working down to shedding our, womb linings. So we're not built like that. It doesn't mean we can't achieve great things. It doesn't mean we can't be productive, but we need to recognize that our productivity is cyclical as opposed
Mm,
to every day I show up and do the same thing in the same way.
mm. Goodness, like every time I talk about this stuff, I'm like, God, I wish I'd known this like 20
Me
years ago.
too. I would have been so much kinder to myself.
Totally. A question comes up for me of, you're a mother.
Yeah.
I'm curious how doing this work has impacted the way that you parent or the way that you
Oh,
operate too as a mum.
massively.
Mm.
Massively. So I think the way I parent was obviously influenced by me as a social worker. And then doing this work, it has enabled me to see my daughter, who's going to be 18 next week, to see her as an individual person with individual needs, with individual rights, with a different way of seeing things. Like before all of this, I kind of saw her as an extension of me rather than her own person who is equipped to make her own choices and decisions. So it's massively impacted that. I've always had an open door policy, but now my open door policy, especially since training as a somatic coach, I am very mindful about how our nervous system operates, about how our biology operates, about how we co-regulate and we also co-dysregulate. So making sure I'm taking care of myself and my nervous system so that even in times of stress, I am still a co-regulatory presence for my daughter, because the older she has become, the more, when she was in year 7, or the beginning of year 8, I can't remember, it was before the pandemic, she had a situation with her friends at school and I couldn't save her. When she was in middle school and there was friendship drama, I could save her. I could say something that would fix the situation, distract her from the situation. I could have a word with somebody's mum. I could fix it. And during her meltdown, like she was very tearful, I realized not only could I not fix it, it wasn't my job to fix it. My job was to hold space for her and her complex emotions. And it is very distressing as a parent to see your child distressed, full stop, and then knowing on top of that, the only thing you can do is help her hold her distress. And if I hadn't done the work I was doing, I would have still been in fix it mode. And my mum is bloody fantastic. And she will still try to fix. She will still try to find a solution. She finds it very difficult to hold space. Like, she's getting much better, but she finds it difficult. And one of the things, this work and being alive in the world right now where we have access to so much information, is learning how to hold space for the person that's emerging, and holding space for myself to accept that the person who is emerging is a product of my parenting, yes, and is also who she's supposed to be. So, yeah, like, she's definitely who she was when she was a small child. And then she is also a very different person in many ways. Not that I expected her to be, but she's very different because we've only got ourselves and what we've seen as our templates. So she's definitely a product of the parenting she's received, and she's also beautifully her own person. And I really like her. Like, I don't like, yeah, not love it, but yeah, I love her, obviously. But I really like her. I really like who she is. And I really like the fact that she'll challenge me. She'll be like, well, I don't really agree. And we can have really robust conversations about those things. And for me as a parent, also the other thing, it took the pressure off. She never needed the perfect version of me. She needed the version of me that would be able to embrace her as she is, hold space as she is, and nurture who she is, as opposed to have these expectations that she's supposed to live up to.
Mm. Amazing. It's such an invitation to like how to bring this work into the way that people parent. And also, I know that how deeply this kind of toxic productivity impacts so many mothers that I know.
She'll say things like, when she's doing her revision, I'm having a self-care day or something. And there's a part of me, the West African conditioned part of me, is like, you should be focused on your books. Especially because I didn't do very well at school with ADHD. I didn't know that. Like, I got what people were saying, but actually doing the work, I found that really difficult. Um, but then she'll just say things, and like, she's heard that from me. She'll say, like, I say our brains need time to just flop about. Our brains just need to flop for a while. She's like, yeah, I'm having a self-care day because my brain just needs to flop. Like, no more is going in. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You have your self-care day, babes. I'll buy you some bath salts. We'll get takeaway. We'll chillax for the day. But yeah, and it just makes her a better human to herself.
God, Tamu, the idea of knowing your body and your needs that much, aged 17, I
She's been
mean,
like that. She's been able to do that since year 10, 14.
wow, amazing. God, there's not going to be any stopping that generation, is there?
Right?
I would love to dive into how toxic productivity infiltrates even the most well-intentioned coaching and wellness. And this was really inspired. I just saw the face there. What's happening for you? Discuss.
Well, I yesterday I was thinking about something and I created a reel saying like, are we girl bossing our healing? Because I'm looking at like we're forever healing, 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 doing development, hashtag doing the work. So we're constantly fixing, poking, prodding. If it was a wound, we would constantly be bathing the wound in TCP. It's not going to heal. And I feel like a lot of our toxic productivity, instead of actually healing the wound of toxic productivity, we've just shoved it into our healing work. So, one of the things that kind of grates on me, and I can be a bit pedantic about words, but when people talk about being a work in progress, I don't think we're a work in progress. I think we're who we are and we can nurture and support and care for ourselves, or we can constantly be poking and prodding. And I do feel like we have made wellness, self care, taking care of ourselves something to do as opposed to a way we care for ourselves. So when I think about people and their routines, I must wake up at 5 a.m. because that's what I'm supposed to be. The top 10 successful people, that's what they do. I must do my journaling. I must go for a walk at a particular time. That feels really rigid and it doesn't feel like there's any space for life in there. So when we first started talking before you pressed record, I said that I'd had a slow morning this morning. Previously, I would have chastised myself. I would have been jumping out of that bed, doing my journaling, doing some cat cow, this or the other, because that's what you're supposed to do. But I recognized that I was so exhausted. So now I'm like, I'm not one of those people, I'm just going to tune into the energy. I have got a strategy, I have got goals, I have got ambitions, but it's yin and yang. I match that with my humanity. So I've got, okay, these are my goals. How do I move towards that when I'm on the floor? That's the minimum effort. How do I move towards that when life is humming along nicely and it's all good? And then how do I move towards that when I'm firing on all cylinders? So it's not that I don't do things, but I know that I can approach it according to where I'm at. And I'm perimenopausal. So my energy levels are bouncing around all over the place. So I work with who I am rather than trying to squeeze myself. So it will be the case of I've promised myself that I am going to the gym to strength train 3 times a week. So I am going. I don't have much energy, but I'm going to let it be a crappy workout. And invariably, it doesn't even end up being a crappy workout. But if it is, so be it. I've still gone. When I was doing training for the non-linear movement method, they would say that the only rubbish practice is the practice you don't do. Everything else is a practice. So if you view life as a practice and all of these things as a practice, it takes the pressure off.
Mm. Completely. And I saw the post that you shared around this girl bossing our healing, and it spoke to me so much. Like it's, yeah, really articulated, so many things for me. And I noticed ages ago when I first started doing yoga, my early 20s, 15 years ago, in the beginning, it was like my break from my otherwise corporate world. It was my happy place, my joy place, the place where I just switched off or, just enjoyed my practice. Didn't take long until I was comparing myself to XYZ person at yoga, till I was making myself good or bad at yoga, or how could I be better at yoga? And that was kind of my first, like, oh, wow, I've really brought my kind of programming of good or bad into a joy
Yeah.
practice for
Mm.
myself. And similar to what you were just saying of, when I first got into self-development, I was like, oh, my journaling, my meditation, my this, my that. And it became like a tick list of like, oh, am I good? Am I being a good spiritual person because I'm ticking all the boxes of all the
Yep.
things that I'm supposed to do? And again, I was like, wow, things that are supposed to be helping me and supporting me in my physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being are suddenly put into these boxes of have I done this and am I a good
Yep.
spiritual person? So
Yep.
it really, really spoke to me what you were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah. And in you saying that, when I think about anything wonderful in my life, none of that has come about from some regimented routine, spiritual practice, da 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 da. It has come from, like, I am the spiritual practice. Like I say to people, um, our nervous system is like the most spiritual place on this planet, other than this planet. It is a place of magic and wonder. You can't manifest what you want to manifest from a dysregulated nervous system. So all of the things that have been it's almost been like a kink in the system, has been when I am being joyful, when I am not, oh gosh, I can feel that I'm feeling lax, so I've got to be in gratitude, when I'm actually doing the gratitude practice from a place of gratitude, when I'm treating my body with reverence and care, because I'm treating my body with reverence and care. I know there's a direct correlation between me cherishing and nourishing myself and extending that to other people and this planet, and me being able to manifest wonderful things, because I'm open, I'm flexible, my window of tolerance is wider, I am open to receive. When we're in there, I've got to do this, we're not open and flexible. So when we do call beautiful things into our lives, they may come, but they don't stay, because we haven't actually opened ourselves up to be in partnership with that thing. We're not vibrating on a frequency that's genuinely going to allow that thing to stay and amplify and morph into whatever it needs to. So when if anything feels like, oh, I should, we need to start questioning, what is that about? Because that's not the energy we need to be operating in if we want to do things that are sustainable and regenerative. If you just want to get something really quickly, should it? Absolutely, but it's not going to stay.
Mm. And there was something else that came up when I was watching that share about the girl bossing of our healing, because something that I recognized in perhaps the way that I was coaching, or also the way that I was experiencing a lot of my own kind of healing or self-development, was this kind of need to like move away from our experience. It's almost like I've identified something that I want to change, so therefore I need to be here, away
Yes,
from my current experience. And it
yes.
really came up for me, and I suppose that you will have experienced this in your somatic training and the way that you work with people. I've just done 18 months of compassionate inquiry training with Gabor Mate's organization. And
Yeah,
something that my mentor said to me when he was watching me working with clients was like somebody coming very much into contact with something that is painful, and my kind of coaching hat coming on of like, okay, that's painful, so let's move you away from that
yes,
to where you want to be.
yes.
But actually, the magic is actually in really coming into connection with
Mhm,
that part of ourselves
mhm.
and bringing compassion, curiosity, understanding. And, from a somatic place, it's really coming into contact with, what our nervous system needs, what our body needs. So that was also really coming up for me of like, when we're in this self-development arena, let's say, I think that there is this trap of really kind of trying to move away from, and that kind of also being a bit of like that girl boss
Yeah,
hustle of healing.
yeah, yeah. Like, to put it succinctly, the personal development we have had thus far tends to focus on positivity rather than progress. Progress is messy, it's sticky, sometimes it's a bit putrid, and we just want to quickly gloss over that. But what happens is, it's like when you have a messy cupboard, and instead of looking at what's in the cupboard, tidying it up, putting things, like giving the things a home within that cupboard, we just keep trying to ram it shut. And every time you open it, the things start falling out again. And because we're so worried about that falling out, we don't recognize that when it falls out of the cupboard, we can actually put it on the sideboard, have a look at what there is, and put things where they need to be. Because the truth is, if we're going to be really mature and radically responsible, those things aren't going to go anywhere. Those things are part and parcel of what make us us. We need to give them a place so they stop kicking off. So if I think about time blindness, I've got ADHD. I now recognize that how I manage time is to do with time blindness. If I just want to squash that down and strategize myself out of it, it's going to pop up all the time. So I recognize it for what it is. And now I've built strategies to take care of that. I don't need to crush it. I don't need to get it out and all of this other kind of stuff. I need to make space for it because that's part and parcel of how I operate. The downside of the time blindness is I don't I cannot guesstimate how long anything is going to take. The plus side of that is I can do things really quickly and people are like, you're like meet road runner. You're like road runner. Like, how did that happen? Again, because of time blindness. Like I can just get things done when I'm really in the mode. That hyper focus really takes me very, very far. And when we're in this constant pursuit of shutting down parts of us because they're not comfortable or because they aren't things that make us proud or we can't show off about them, we then are shutting down and abandoning parts of ourselves. The more we can embrace ourselves fully, the more we can create strategies and tools that support us as we are. And as women, something I would add to that is we learn very quickly, very subconsciously, to shut down our magic, to shut down the things that make us remarkable, to shut down our strengths, because we get messages about showing off, about intimidating people, about not being relatable, about making people feel uncomfortable. So we shut those down as well. So it's about us embracing ourselves as a whole and allowing everything to have a place, but knowing, there are some things that need to be on the front row, some things that need to be on stage with you, and there are some things that should be sitting in the rafters, but they do need to be there.
Mm. There's a video that I watched as well. Just you can see I've done a right deep dive stalk into this.
Clearly.
I just shared this on my story as well because it really spoke to me. And, I know I'm conscious of the time, so I just wanted to bring this in before we end. This was a really powerful video for me to watch, especially in January where, I've tried to decondition myself from the, out the floodgates, but more into the kind of reflect, envision, go a little bit slow. And you shared a video around denying our truth. It was, you share this clip around, if you denied yourself the fact that you want to be out there speaking and doing, big events, then you're actually denying your truth. Can you
Yeah.
speak to that? Because that was really powerful for me to watch, and I'm sure will be powerful for people to hear.
Yeah. So that was from on the 28th or 29th of December, I hosted a 2025 planning workshop called Dream Big, Plan Smart. And what I was saying to people is that we often deny what we really want. We have these goals, we have these aspirations, we have these desires, and we're like, oh no, not little me. Oh no, that's too big. Oh no, I'm not going to be able to do that. We can have all of these seemingly just reasons as to why we can't have that. And my hypothesis is that those things that maybe make us clench our bum cheeks, look away a little bit, feeling a bit nervous, those things are aligned with the truth of who we are. We have been blessed with those things. Those things are part of our soul contract. They're part of our divine alignment. They're part of our design, and they speak to the truth of who we are. But we have experiences in life where we assume an identity to cope. So we don't want to intimidate people. People will think we've got ideas above our station, whatever your version of that is. So then we create an identity that allows us to be tolerated and accepted by people rather than being who we are and finding who we belong with. So then instead of going for, so in my case, my version would be instead of saying that I want to be speaking on stages internationally, the bigger stage, the better, I will say things like, I'll speak to my coaching clients or I'll arrange my own events and I'll invite people there. I will play it down. I'd make a smaller version. That smaller version would be aligned with the version of me that heard in my childhood, no one likes to show off, or Tamu, you talk too much, or Tamu, why do you use big words all the time? And I'm like, this is how I speak. And when we do that, we're denying who we really are and we're being dishonest with ourselves. So I want you to think about, and people who are listening, I want you to think about when you realize somebody's been dishonest with you. whether it's there and then you're like, no, hold on, this doesn't make any sense. You're not telling me the truth. Or you're walking in the park and you're like, hold on a minute, that didn't make any sense. That feeling you feel, we have that inside ourselves, but we're so switched off from it because we've learnt to dismiss it all the time. That is hugely dysregulating for your nervous system. And what you're teaching yourself is you are an authority figure that's untrustworthy. And so you're then operating from that space. So it's really important for us to get curious about the things we really want and start to identify why we deny ourselves. Invariably, you will find it is something that is external rather than internal. And we get afraid that when, that Marianne Williamson, our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure, we get frightened, terrified, in fact, that if we really step into that full version of ourselves, people that have resonated with us in our coping mechanisms will not want to be our friends anymore. They will not want to be in relationship with us anymore. And what we need to, and it's very hard, it took me a very long time to get to this place. What we need to recognize is the more authentic we are, the more truthful we are about what we desire, the more we open ourselves up to relationships, places, and spaces that are aligned with that version of us. So we're then able to enter into relationships, places, and spaces that are spacious enough for our growth. So you'll be in relationship with people who are not threatened by your growth, they're inspired by your growth. So my version was going from having some relationships with like, why are you never satisfied? Why can't you just be grateful for what you've got? To people saying, oh yeah, I can see this for you. Let's set an intention together. And that is because I recognized that I needed to be in relationship with people who were so ambitious for themselves that they were able to be ambitious for me too, and vice versa.
Mm. Amazing. What a place to leave the conversation. I feel like I'm going to have to request a part 2 with you because
I will be there.
I have got 1,000 more questions that I want to ask you. It has been amazing. And I just wanted to ask just a little final question of how are you letting your days breathe this
Oh my
January?
goodness. Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, wowzers. This is going to sound like it is the opposite of letting my days breathe, but genuinely, having that time inside my diary allows me to let my days breathe. And also, we talk about somatics like it's some magical thing. We're all somatic, we're all embodied, we live inside a body. So something I do, which is part and parcel of the reason why I had a slow morning this morning, before I get out of bed, I just put my hand on my heart and ask myself what I need today. And I let that guide me. And we're not always going to be able to follow it to the T. But if I had to be up and out this morning, I would have left my home earlier so I could walk slowly. So that would have been my slow thing rather than power walking to the tube station. So asking your heart, what do I need today? And allowing that to guide you in some way.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you so much. How can people find you, Tamu? What do you have going on? How can people connect with you?
The best place to find me is Instagram, and I'm there as tamu.thomas. I am going to be opening the doors to my rebranded membership community. That's something I'm really focused on for this year. So if you connect with me on Instagram, you'll be able to find details about that, because one of my callings, one of my missions is to democratize personal growth and personal development and make things more accessible for people. So if that sounds like it's your cup of tea, then come and find me.
And I would love to do a part 2 on the democratization of wellness
Oh
because,
yeah, my God,
oh,
yes.
it is conversations that need to take place. So
Yeah.
stay tuned for that one.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you so much, Tamu. Great to connect with you. And thanks so much for this conversation today.
Take care.
Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show, all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references, and contact information is detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback. So feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website, higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share or send on to someone else who would benefit. Until next time, big love.